We, the members of the secret order of alchemical actors, do solemnly commit ourselves to a full and honest telling of the history of the occult as far as we know it. My name is Dr. Rob C. Thompson, welcoming you back to the third installment of our ongoing conversation with Renaissance Fair artists and, shall we say, stars, Luke?
Absolutely.
Judas and Magnolia.
Hello.
Hey, thank you for having us. It's great to be back, guys.
It's great to have you guys back.
Yeah, it is such a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's so nice to be back. Yeah, I think this is our third time with you guys. It's always a pleasure.
It's our third time. How many times do we have to appear before we get a cool nickname? When does that occur? Just asking.
You already have
wonderful
names. There's no sense in changing.
Yeah, it's really
you
hard.
can't change perfection.
Good point.
Thank you very much.
Judas might raise some controversy, but Magnolia is a superb name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So...
Maybe you guys can both be the gospel of. Good.
We're so happy to be back. Judas and Magnolia are big fans of Occult Confessions.
Oh, yeah.
And we are also members on your Patreon. So we definitely want to encourage anyone listening to today's episode to check out the Occult Confessions Patreon and make that pledge today. So I am half of Judas and Magnolia. We are a husband and wife team of entertainers. We are variety artists, and our acts usually feature escape artistry, magic and illusion, fire performance, music, and more. So today we're going to be focusing on the music part of what Judas and Magnolia offer, specifically the work of my first album, which was all completely composed by 12th century Benedictine abbess Hildegard von Bingen. So this music is relevant for us, not least because so many of our Judas and Magnolia bookings throughout the year are at Ren fairs and medieval fairs as well. So my first album features Hildegard. My second album focuses on some of the cantigas de Santa Maria from 13th century Spain. And my next album that I'm currently working on is actually going to be entirely English Renaissance. But that Hildegard album, my first album, is just so near and dear to my heart. Because when I was a kid, back in the 90s, at my first Ren Fair, I had the most magical day of my life at the Ren Fair. I got to dance on stage with a queen. I had a knight joust for my honor and win. And that was also the day that I heard Hildegard's music for the first time, and it changed my life. I didn't know it at the time, but here we are today. Back then, that day that I heard Hildegard's music, it was the most beautiful music that I had ever heard in my entire 9 years of life. And I just remember being like so transfixed by it. So when my family and I finally tracked down the source of that music, because we kind of heard it like through the lanes, right? And I was like, where is this coming from? When we finally found it, there was another layer of significance to that performance for me, because it was being performed solo by a young woman. So I want to shout out here real quick to Lisa McCord in the Houston, Texas area. She was singing Hildegard von Bingen solo and a cappella. So that just means it was just her voice. There was no musical instrument accompaniment, right? So for me at that time, it was really incredible to see live a woman holding a space by herself and commanding that space so beautifully. And now I look back and I think how appropriate that she was singing Hildegard von Bingen, who is one of very few Catholic theologians who speaks about the divine feminine. And as I've gotten older, I've been able to delve into the writings and the illuminations depicting the divine feminine. And for me, that journey with Hildegard has been really healing, because as that young child growing up in the Roman Catholic Church, as someone who was told that they are femme, When I looked up at the altar on Sundays, I did not see someone who looked like me. And I think it's important for all of us to be able to see ourselves in the divine so that we can feel in a really deep way that the divine is also in us. And I think especially for all the Christian traditions that embrace that theology of the Holy Trinity, of that three-part God in one, I think there's an opportunity there to incorporate the divine feminine. Hildegard von Bingen uses a lot of feminine energy in describing the divine, and even Juliet of Norwich as well. She talks about a mother God. And that makes so much sense to my brain, that we have a God the Mother, a God the Son, a God the Holy Spirit. Because in that way, we have represented a divine feminine, a sacred masculine, and then we even have like a non-binary representation of the divine, right? So when we just focus on the masculine incarnation of the divine, I think we do a real disservice to so much of humanity. And so that was my entry point into all of this history and theology and mysticism and healing for me personally. It was through the music of Hildegard von Bingen at the Texas Renaissance Festival in the 90s. And so it's very cosmic for me that I now get to recreate that experience for the next generation. I get on stages around the country and I talk about Hildegard's theology. I sing her music. People have the opportunity to purchase my Hildegard album and take it home. And I feel so grateful for the people who have come before me, who have made Hildegard's works from centuries ago available to me today. And I feel like I'm doing my little part to help ensure that centuries from now, people will still be experiencing the inspiration and the healing that Hildegard has to offer. So that's a little bit about me.
It's pretty amazing you know the name of the woman. How do you know the name of the woman at the festival? That's really something. You were 9 years old, right? How do you know her name?
So like picture this, like we're just walking through the fair. So it's my 9-year-old self, and my mom is pushing my little like 2-year-old brother in the stroller, and my dad is with us. And like just for the visual like comedy of this, my dad is 6'6", okay? And so he's a large, intimidating man. And I'm this little 9-year-old, you know, and I hear this music and I'm like, what is that? Because I'm like, this is the most beautiful thing I've heard in my entire life. We have to find this now, people. Let's go. And so just imagine me like grabbing my father and like dragging my entire family through the lanes of the fair. We find this young woman. I make my family sit down. I make them watch the rest of her show. I make them tip her after her show. And then I make them buy me her CD, which I still have to this day. And I got to use that material as some of the large body of work that I used as reference material when I created my Hildegard album 2 decades later. And we have mutual friends. Lisa McCord is still doing early music in the Houston area. And so we are friends of friends and connected that way through colleagues. So yeah, that's how I know her. And she now has my CD.
Cool.
And I send her all my stuff. So yeah, we're Hildegard buddies.
That's very special. What years are we talking about with Hildegard, medieval wise? What century?
So she was born in 1098, and she is generally considered a 12th century mystic. She died, I believe, in 1197 or 79. Maybe it was 79. 79.
It's 100-some years old there. Okay.
Right. I think she was 80-something. I can double check this.
It's an exciting period.
You think about like Richard the Lionheart, and Richard's mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was friends with Hildegard. They were pen pals.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to kind of connect European history together and see when Hildegard lived, you can think about Richard the Lionheart, the Crusades, and what all was going on then.
Yeah. And for the record,
Yeah, Holy Roman Emperors. And
born in
all that stuff.
1098, yeah, and then died in 1179. Nailed it.
Okay.
Nailed it. So yeah, 12th century.
Still a very long, prosperous life.
For someone in the medieval era,
It's an intense time for the church. Out of secular church. I mean, there's always secular church conflict, but there's a lot of secular church conflict, coming to a head near the end of her life. There.
Oh yeah, yeah, and she what a woman. She was writing letters to heads of state and reprimanding them for getting out of line, which I just I admire that,
Sure.
just speaking her truth to power. It's great.
So tell us a little bit about her, Magnolia.
Sure. So yeah, I've brainstormed 17 of my favorite facts about Hildegard today. And I chose that number because Hildegard's feast day is on September 17th. So that seemed like a fun number to go with. So we've got kind of 17 points on our agenda-ish. I don't know that we're gonna get to all of them. However, if you're listening to this episode and you just can't get enough Hildegard, I am going to make all of this material available to Rob and Luke. So if they want to put that on their Patreon, then you might want to check that out to get all the goods on Hildegard. And then if you just need more Hildegard music in your life, then you can check out the Judas and Magnolia website. And we have our online shop there, and you can order my Hildegard album on our website at judasandmagnolia.com/shop. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get into some of our 17 fun facts about Hildegard. So Hildegard's musical works are the largest surviving collection of medieval monophony that we still have around today. So fun little note on some of these little popcorn words that we're using. Monophony just means music that only has a melody, so no harmonies. And it's generally performed by a single voice or other instrument. Hildegard was of the opinion that music is the highest form of praise and that it was invented in order to worship properly. She went on to say that she wrote her music to reflect what angels sound like.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the questions that kind of came up when we were preparing for this before today was, and I thought this was a really fantastic question. So someone brought up, how might Hildegard's angelic musical vision influence the way that we view sacred sound and artistic inspiration today? And I've kind of been thinking on this for a while, and I feel like I have a few different angles on this. So my first thought is that I feel like she definitely set the precedent of female artistic authority in a sacred space during this time when, male authority definitely dominated the scene, right? Because we're talking the Catholic Church in the medieval era, right? So as a child growing up in the church in the 90s and even, the early 2000s, I was able, as a girl, to serve as a cantor, which means that I was leading the entire congregation in song, right? And I think people like Hildegard definitely helped to pave that way for people like me centuries later. And that's significant for me personally because I feel like my spirituality personally has always been very connected to musicality. And I think Hildegard experienced that in a very similar way. She also, though, she was a woman writing music to be sung by female voices. And I think that's really notable too. In this, in so many ways, she was a woman ahead of her time, and she was paving the way to say, definitely, there is something sacred in women's creation, and there is something sacred in women's voices. And then the other thing that, and there's another fun term that I want to define. The other thing that I thought about on this, in like how her musical vision influenced the way that we experience sacred sound today and artistic inspiration today. So her melismas were incredible and set her music apart from what a lot of people were experiencing at the time, which was plain chant. And so for those who don't know what a melisma is, I'm going to define it, and then I'll give an example of that in her music, and then I can also give a modern day example. So a melisma is a group of notes sung to one syllable of text. A melisma is a group of notes sung to one syllable of text. So here's an example. And this is from track number 9 on my album. This is from a song called Caritas Habundat. I'm going to sing the first word of the first line of this music. It sounds like this. Okay, that was one word. There were 3 syllables and lots of notes, because each one of those syllables had many notes, right? So that's a melisma, all right? And so what Hildegard, those existed before Hildegard, but she really took them to a whole nother level in her music. She had these soaring melodies, and remember, she's working with female voices, so they're, you know, really experiencing these heights of song and music, which kind of mirror these heights of, you know, religious ecstasy. But her music also was incredibly challenging for the singers. I mean, a lot of her works span 3, almost 4 octaves, which is very physically challenging for someone who is, you know, performing that. But also the breath work that you have to do in order to sing these pieces, because when you're trained as a vocalist, we try really hard to not breathe in the middle of a word or the middle of a phrase, because we want to kind of mirror everyday speech, right? So we want to put breaths in strategic places, so that it doesn't kind of detract from the musicality of a piece. Well, you've got Hildegard over here with these incredibly long melismas. It is physically demanding to not breathe for that entire word or that entire line, especially when you have to have so much breath support to sustain these really high notes, right? So that's something that Hildegard, I feel like, really changed kind of the way people were experiencing music in the time. And I think that we can also see this kind of travel down through the centuries of music. We definitely start to see more music created for women's voices throughout the Renaissance. And then we see that really fun use of melismas in today's more modern music, including, you know, jazz, pop. I can give you a modern day example. Think Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, Christina Aguilera. When Whitney Houston sings "I Will Always Love You," focus on the word "you." Okay, it goes, "And I will always love you. I will always love you. Right? Those are melismas, right? And I think those kinds of soaring, beautiful, like water fountain-esque pieces of musical artistry, I think we can definitely trace a lineage back to Hildegard. So those are my thoughts on that in terms of music and how she's influenced down through the ages.
Is this for the convent? Is she writing for the nuns is it like The Sound of Music circa 1150?
Yes, actually. So that's I'm so glad you brought this up, because yes, her music is liturgical. It is meant to be experienced in a sacred space. It's meant to be experienced, during the mass or, the divine office, right? And I feel like I this actually reminds me of something that I think about a lot. So Hildegard wrote what is today considered the earliest version that we have of a morality play. And she wrote this in the 12th century, arguably, like in spirit, one could say that it was perhaps the first opera, right? Because it's putting theater, right? Like there's a whole cast of characters, right? And they have lines with music. In fact, the only character that doesn't sing, this is very fun, is the devil. Because remember, music is a form of worship. So the only person who can't sing in the whole thing is the devil. But it's actually, so, and I bring this up because sometimes people hear what I'm singing and they go, oh, you're singing opera. And I have to kind of hold myself back to not get into a 30-minute long discussion of why modern musicologists don't consider Hildegard's music opera, right? But the short of it is that opera is generally considered to have been invented in the 1600s. And there's a lot more set pieces and costume design that you generally see with opera versus what Hildegard had available to her at the time. And really, I think the kicker is that opera is generally considered secular, and Hildegard's music is sacred. But also, I think there's a case for Hildegard inventing opera. Just personal opinion. People can fight me about it.
Well, she didn't have an option, right? At the time period, all theater was sacred in some regard. I mean, the morality play was a little more secular, but everything was church-oriented. You either had your mystery play, which was about Jesus or his friends, or you had your morality play, which was telling you how not to go to hell. So you couldn't, sit around and write Othello or anything.
I prefer the plays that tell me how to go to hell.
How to go to hell. Well, I've got those now, yeah.
Jesus, why can't you, Luke? I believe in you.
Luke, man. You just asked how to go to hell.
Check.
It's like Asmodeus climbed up inside of your device, man.
So for context, anyone listening, if I forget to edit this out, the webcam just had an absolute freak out.
Like a David Lynchian experience just happened in Luke's house.
We're talking about morality plays and passion plays in reference to Hildegard. Whenever an entertainment director at a Renaissance fair wants to know, how does an escape artist show? How does this show of illusions fit into the Renaissance or a medieval setting? What are you doing on stage that makes this make sense? Mm-hmm. I generally talk about our shows come in a set that really mimics a passion play. That our shows have more or less 3 parts. One of them is the torment. One of them, I guess, kind of get chained or wrapped up in chains and pulled around on stage for a while. Mm-hmm. The second one, I get locked underwater. I get put under. I get entombed. Mm-hmm. And then I rise again. I come out of the water. And in our third show, I generally do a seance or a mind reading show where it's a demonstration of power where we talk about kind of moral topics. Mm-hmm. So we like to frame our show.
So which one of the two of you can hold their breath the longest?
Ooh, I think Jesus might win. We haven't made it to 3 days yet. We'll try.
Oh, you or Jesus. But Judas or Magnolia, who's got more breath control?
I would say Frank the mind reading
Or Jesus.
can probably hold his breath the longest.
Frank the Mind Reading Goose is our mascot. We bring him out whenever one of us is really sick and we can't go on stage. The other one is replaced. The one who's sick is then replaced by a ceramic goose on stage. And we just run through the show as if it's going according to plan, but there's a ceramic goose on stage. Here's our ceramic goose. It has its own costume. He has its own costume.
Very nice.
There's been shows in Georgia. It happened a couple of years ago in Georgia now. I was sick with strep throats. I couldn't perform. And so Frank takes my place and is chained up underwater. Held his breath for an amazing amount of time.
I was impressed.
After that show, I would be on stage and I would get heckled by the crowd. Midway through the show, somebody would stand up and be like, "Hey, where's Frank? Bring back the goose." You know, whenever you're upstaged by a ceramic goose.
Give the people what they want.
Yeah. Keeping you humble.
Yeah, but the ceramic goose doesn't have the cod piece.
No cod piece for the goose.
That's,
right?
yeah.
Oh.
That's true. Cod pieces are usually half off on Sundays. And they're there. Now you know. You're welcome.
It is my favorite part of it.
Broke Luke.
My favorite part of everything we do is whenever we're like performing in a small town somewhere and I step on stage dressed in a tiny vest and tights with a giant codpiece and I watch half my audience not know where to look. Like they just don't know where to focus their eyes. I can watch them in the audience. I can watch them do this. Favorite. I love it.
It's so good. I think my favorite was, I think it was here in Kentucky a few years ago when a woman came up to me after the show. Like she watched the whole show. We did the show. She watched it. She comes up to me at the merch table afterwards and she's like pointing out your codpiece like I didn't notice. Right? Like she thinks maybe I didn't notice because maybe my like reaction was not appropriate to her. So she's pointing it out to me and I'm like, "Yes, my lady, 'tis historically accurate and all natural." And I just like winked at her and she just left. She did not know how to handle that situation. That was my favorite.
Now, a little Judas and Magnolia behind the scenes.
Oh,
So
no.
I'm always afraid, or I was afraid, that like the codpiece would somehow, because the codpiece is really like a flap, you know, it's a flap. And so I was always afraid that like a chain would get caught and like rip the codpiece open. And then like it would be like Dear Renaissance Festival, like be written about in the news.
Dear
So
Renaissance Festival.
all of my cod pieces are like stitched closed at the top. That way there can't be like an accidental costume malfunction on stage.
So yeah, the cod pieces that he wears are not actually functional. We've engineered it that way so that there's no costume malfunctions on stage. You're welcome, everyone. If you want to see more of that, you've got to actually buy the Judas and Magnolia romance novel.
Yeah, it's got pirates, magic, and tentacles.
Ah.
Ooh.
True story. That does exist.
Very
That
nice.
is also available in our online shop.
Go to it. So we should get back to Hildegard.
It'll be in the show notes.
Hildegard.
So she's writing this music now. It's performed in churches though. It's not like The Sound of Music where they only sing to each other on the convent then.
Okay. So they are performing it in the Abbey. I don't think they're going around like touring it like as a musical group, if that's what you're asking. Like they are
Okay. But
singing it amongst themselves, but it's not
non-nuns
really
can hear
like
it?
to each other. It's like to God.
Yeah, it's a form of praise and worship. So the audience
see.
is divine.
Did that answer the question?
Yes, yeah. But are there people who are not? Could you hear it if you were not in the convent? Was it possible?
If you
for it
visit,
to be
yeah.
heard?
Well, and I mean, you still can today. Like the last time I visited Saint Cecilia's church in Rome, in Italy, I happened to walk in while they were singing one of the divine offices, right? So I got to listen to nuns singing the divine office at Saint Cecilia's church, which, if you don't know, Saint Cecilia is the patron saint of music. So that's why that's cool.
We've got ceramic saints. We've got ceramic geese. Got ceramics.
So much ceramics.
That's like a caravan. Oh my gosh.
Oh goodness.
So she writes down this music, or somebody writes it down for her, and it's passed down then within the abbey?
That's what I was going to ask too. So I'm assuming she's penning her own music, but is it oral tradition that then brings it to the next generation, or is it actually documented fully?
Yeah, so yes, and so Hildegard did transcribe, some of her, her visions, which we call illuminations today, now that they are, on paper. And she also transcribed some of her like medical works, her theology, her music. But she also had scribes that were sent to her from the Vatican. And so sometimes, so it was like a yes and. So like she's penning this, her scribes are penning this. And so we do still have the music today. Like this is my actual, I know our listeners can't see this, but for Rob and Luke, I'm holding up my actual sheet music that I used when recording my first album. Now, the music itself back then, the notation was a little different from the notation that we have today. So when you actually look at the old neumes, it's like it's kind of up for interpretation a little bit, right? Like, how long do you hold this note, right? Like, are we holding that for a count of 4 or a count of 5, right? And then like when it comes to the meter, I mean, you do have choral interpretations of her music, and so they'll want to actually be working with a meter. But like for my album, I did that solo and a cappella, so I'm not really working with a time signature. Like I'm just kind of going, like it's very free form. So yeah, her stuff was written down by herself, by her scribes, and then also her music is still performed today by the nuns at one of her abbeys that still exists. So there's plenty of opportunities to hear it in person, whether you hear it from her nuns at Ebingen or whether you hear it from me at the Ren Fair. But then there's also plenty of recordings as well.
And when you say her nuns and her abbeys, like she founded these abbeys.
Yeah, she founded 2 abbeys, Rupertsberg and Ebingen, and I believe Rupertsberg is the one that's no longer around. I think that perished in a war, I think. But Ebingen is still around over 800 years later.
So the Pope takes an interest, or the Vatican, I should say, Eugenius, Adrian, one of these guys. How? I mean, usually when a woman grabs the Pope's interest, you're a little, you get a little nervous.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that could have gone not great.
You've got this brilliant woman who's having visions.
Yeah.
So you can imagine what these scribes that were sent to go record what she's doing were kind of up to, They're partly recording what she's doing, but they're partly also reporting back on, like, where are these visions coming from? What's your interpretation? Are they divine? Are they demonic? Mm-hmm. So it's sort of scribes, sort of helper, but also sort of spy that was sent into these abbeys to keep an eye on her.
And so she reached...
So she's got a reputation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, she did. I think once we get into like the political intrigue of this scenario, so she leaned on friends. So she first talked to her confessor, I think it was Volmar, about these, and kind of got his opinion.
About these, you mean her?
About her visions. And then, you know, then it kind of goes up the chain of command. Well, eventually she reached out to Bernard of Clairvaux, who was pretty big deal at that time, right? And so like becomes pen pals with Bernard of Clairvaux, and so is carrying on a correspondence with him and kind of talking to him in confidence about what she's experiencing. And it was really Bernard that like green lighted Hildegard von Bingen. And then from there, he put her on the radar of the Pope at the time and like put in a good word for her and like so on and so forth. And thank goodness, because yeah, like you said, that really could have gone not so well because women being unruly mystics, we've seen that go a different direction for other mystics throughout the ages. You know, Marguerite Porete did not end so well for her, right? But yeah, Hildegard von Bingen definitely, she reached out to allies first, and then it went to the Pope, got the green light, and she was pretty good from there on out. I don't want to say she didn't ever experience any difficulties. I mean, she definitely had people who were not fans, and she was definitely that unruly mystic. She spoke truth to power. She held to her convictions, and there were times that she was reprimanded and punished, you know, but here we are 8 centuries later, and she's now, you know, a saint. She's a doctor of the church and still inspiring people throughout the ages.
When you think about the scribes there recording what she was doing, brings to my favorite little tidbits about Hildegard that you might want to elaborate on. Her own language.
Oh, yeah.
So, as far as I understand, and Magnolia, I'm sure, is going to expound upon this, she created her own language that was spoken between her and her nuns. Because you had these scribes, you had these priests that were sort of snooping around. And sometimes she didn't want the fellas understanding what she was saying to her nuns. So she taught her nuns its own functional language. That way she could give them direction and talk with them without the people sent by the church at large really understanding what she was saying.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's because she constructed her own language, it's not uncommon for conlangers to wish each other a happy St. Hildegard's Day every September 7th or 17th, which is her feast day, which I love. But yeah, I think officially the story is that the lingua ignota was, you know, for a spiritual communication with the divine, but it was also taught to her nuns. And so in my mind, it is not difficult to then imagine that, you know, that would have definitely come in handy for her, you know, when she's got, you know, these guys around hanging out from the Vatican who are, you know, definitely reporting back. I imagine that the mover and shaker she was, but, you know, it might have been nice to have an unknown language in your back pocket for scheming schemes.
And do you know if this language came to her as something she created or something that was divinely inspired?
So according to her, it was definitely not of her own making. It, like her visions and, you know, the music, it was revealed to her. So the language does have its own alphabet. The nuns were taught this. And her scribes might have known the alphabet. You know, I wasn't there, hard to know. But yeah, it was a mystical language that was divinely inspired. It was a way to communicate, you know, with the divine, or, you know, and so in that way, it's, you know, kind of like other mystical languages like Enochian, which was recorded by John Dee and Edward Kelly in the 16th century, right? So I think today most people's experience of something like this is going to be most akin to like speaking in tongues or mantras and sacred syllables like Om. But yeah, I think, how cool is that, right? That like forgoing mundane language can help to open up our minds to more mystical experiences.
But it was more structured than speaking in tongues. Often speaking in tongues,
yes,
you can't reproduce it. There's not a grammar.
Yeah.
Where hers, there was its own grammar. It was its own.
Yeah. Speaking with tongues, if I'm one of her nuns, I don't think I'm going to be able to interpret what she is telling me.
Yeah. Right. Totally.
So to me, it had more in common with, say, Enochian than it did like a barbarous language.
Yes.
Like there was more.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely.
But it is interesting that it was not only a tool that she used to kind of work almost privately within the church, but also a language that she used as a tool of the divine. So it's fun that it exists on both sides of this parallel.
Yeah.
I know we're trying to do 17 facts. I'm going to say we're up to like, I don't know, 11 at this point.
Yeah.
So...
I've got so much more.
But can we go back a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
Well, where does she come from? We didn't talk about childhood. I mean, it's tough, I know, in the medieval period, but like, what do we know about her background?
So Hildegard was the 10th child in a like kind of aristocratic family. So not like royalty, right? But they're not slumming it, okay? And so the reason I mentioned that she's the 10th child, like that has significance for her, because at that time, tithing, which is giving the church a 10th of your property or wealth, was very commonplace. Okay, so in this context, it's not surprising that Hildegard was given to the church, and that probably happened around 8 years old or so, and so that I feel like that this reflects like just how entangled social customs were with church structure, right? So especially for girls at the time, to some extent boys within the aristocracy, but especially for girls, these decisions were generally not their own. And yet it's notable to me that Hildegard thrived in her life, right? So to me, one of the things that's incredibly inspiring about her is that she transformed this experience that was born of duty into a life that actually defied convention on so many levels, right? Like, I want to be very clear with our listeners that she entered into a vocation as a very young child under the tutelage of an anchoress, okay? So for those who are not familiar with what that means, these people, anchoresses or anchorites, generally live very solitary lives. Anchorites specifically take a vow of stability of place. So they are literally walled into a cell that is somehow attached to a church or monastery, okay? So imagine as an 8-year-old being bricked into a small cell with one other person for the rest of your foreseeable life, and how that might shape someone, especially at such an early age, okay? So this was not her choice, and yet she lived her life with the circumstances that she was given, and then she transformed her life into going on preaching tours around Europe, composing the largest surviving collection of medieval monophony that we still have today, being physician to Frederick Barbarossa, and more.
Being the first doctor of Germany.
Right? So for me, Hildegard is this reminder that even if we don't get to choose how our journey starts, we still get to choose how we decide to move forward. And that's like a very much like bloom where you're planted kind of thing, right? And I find a lot of inspiration from Hildegard in that way.
And she's uniformly the church is good with her throughout her whole life. I'm thinking this reminds me a lot of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, who famous, she was also an intellectual and nun in Mexico and in the Renaissance period. But the church turned on her. They had had enough of this mouthy woman writing poetry and having her own opinions and things, and considered her too secular at some point. So Hildegard managed to remain sacred, consistently sacred in their eyes, even though she's serving Frederick Barbarossa and things like this.
I do like. So she was considered, even in her time, as the Sibyl of the Rhine, right? So a Sibyl is a woman in ancient times supposed to utter the oracles and prophecies of a god, right? And the Rhine is the major river in the region where she lived, and that's near where her Ebingen monastery is built. So she had a lot going for her in terms of popular opinion at the time. But again, she was not always in the good graces of her superiors. And like earlier, I had mentioned that she was sometimes reprimanded and punished for things that she said or did. And an example of that is later in her life, there was a kerfuffle with a guy who supposedly was excommunicated. According to Hildegard, he was welcomed back into the arms of the church on his deathbed. He repented and was received back into the arms of Christ. He dies. They bury him there on the grounds, on sacred ground. Someone who doesn't like Hildegard gets word of this and tattles. And there's like this whole standoff that goes on for years where they're like, you have to, like, he was excommunicated. You have to not bury him on your grounds in the middle of the night. So like they come to the ground, to her monastery to like dig him up, right? In the middle of the night, she goes out with her nuns and she disrupts the whole graveyard. So now you don't know who's buried where, and you don't know which one is this guy's remains, right? And so that's a big to the patriarchy, like literally, not figuratively, like literally. She's like, take that. And so what they do is they place an edict on her and her nuns. They couldn't sing the divine office, which is a pretty big deal for someone who considers music as the highest form of praise. And I think they also couldn't receive the Eucharist, which is a pretty big deal for nuns. So no, she was not always in the good graces of the church, and that's just one example. But she was considered by many of her time to be a prophet, and she's considered by many people still to have been a prophet. And I think in her, like, we can actually see a lot of modern parallels, right? I think we see prophetic voices speaking up these days through women, through queer folks, through other marginalized communities. And like off the top of my head, examples that quickly come to mind are Bell Hooks with her writing on the nature of love, Greta Thunberg and her speaking about the climate crisis, Malala speaking up for equal rights for girls and women, Emma Gonzalez demanding legislation to create a safer and less violent world for us all. These voices are not necessarily only found in sacred spaces, but I think they are consistent with many of the themes found in Hildegard's teachings. And, to focus on sacred spaces specifically, I think it's actually very sad that today the Mother Church that Hildegard in her day challenged still has yet to heed the call of women's ordination and turns its back on voices like Matthew Fox and Carl Cabot, who seek to uplift the divine feminine in the church. I think in these instances, it's especially important to remember that even though we can celebrate Hildegard today as a saint and a doctor of the church, those honorifics were a long time in coming. All right, she was born in 1098, died in 1179, but wasn't formally declared a saint until May of 2012. And then she was declared Doctor of the Church in October of that same year. So it took the church over 800 years to acknowledge her place among the communion of saints and her authority in church doctrine. And during her lifetime, she was not always embraced by those in power because she spoke truth to power, and she was sometimes reprimanded and punished for that. She held firm to her convictions, though, and, it only took the church 800 years to catch up, so maybe 800 years from now, Matthew Fox will be considered a saint, and we'll have women's ordination, and maybe in 800 years, Carl Cabot will be considered a doctor of the church, which actively calls for nuclear disarmament as a function of honoring the sanctity of all life. Only time will tell.
I mean, for context, Bernard, I think, her buddy Bernard was like, within the century, he was moved up through the whole saintly lines.
I was going to ask if there was like an example of someone else who had achieved sainthood, prior to her. Like 800 years is a huge gap. Like I don't expect her to be, like a living saint necessarily, but
yeah,
they've got to do better than 800 years.
Thank you.
At least 799. And then I'd have no qualms.
So so thinking about like sainthood and doctors of the church. So just for our listeners, so being a doctor of the church means that worldwide Catholic theology is informed by Hildegard's teachings. There are currently 37 doctors of the church. Only 4 of those are women. And I don't think institutional recognition necessarily creates spiritual authority. I think it's often catching up to it. For people like Hildegard who speak from the margins as a chronically ill woman, and who speak truth to power, this kind of recognition can open up doors for those who come next. It can serve as deeply powerful representation, but it can also sometimes sanitize the truly radical nature of these figures. So I think we have an opportunity to celebrate the recognition and the representation of diverse voices and experiences. And I think we are also called to know them in their whole truth.
Something I want to touch on before we start wrapping up, because I have a feeling we may have to invite you guys back for a 4th episode if you're not opposed. Just to keep things within a normal kind of time frame. I want to get into her visions, her illuminations a little bit. Illuminate us on her illuminations.
Yeah, well, previously mentioned Matthew Fox has a great book that I've had for a few years and I really enjoy. It's called Illuminations of Hildegard von Bingen by Matthew Fox. And I've used this. Actually, I think I used it as reference material for my CD release party for my Hildegard album. I did, my CD release party was doing a Mother's Day concert at my parents' church, St. Pius X in San Antonio, Texas. So, because we were there that year for Mother's Day, and I'm like never in that area on Mother's Day, but it was like just post-COVID, and so like everyone's schedules were weird. And I was releasing this album celebrating the divine feminine. And so I did a concert that featured the music of Hildegard incorporated into my album. But I also kind of snuck in a lecture series because in between each song, I told you guys, Hildegard is my special interest. I nerd out so hard. So in between each song, I then also projected onto the church wall her illuminations. And so I would basically pair like one of her illuminations with a song that like dovetailed with the themes that illumination was talking about, right? So it was this experience of like, you get to see the imagery and then you also get to hear the music, right? And so I would kind of do a talk and like interpret like, this is what's going on in this illumination, and this is what this song is about, and this is how it goes together, and like, you know, like this is our shared heritage as Catholics, right? And like, happy Mother's Day, because like you are, like we all are co-creators with God, and like, let's honor the divine feminine among us, right?
Can you talk a little bit about what she was trying to share with these illuminations, what the illuminations were?
Yeah. So like I said, if you want to see them, I think we've given Occult Confessions one of my absolute favorite of Hildegard's illuminations, which is included on my CD. And I feel that particular one really sums up her very like nature-based theology. But if you want to see more, I absolutely recommend Illuminations of Hildegard von Bingen by Matthew Fox. So in her illuminations, and I want to be clear, again, these visions were given to her. Okay, they were not, according to her, they were not of her own making, right? And I think many artists, we hear them kind of say similar words, right? Of like, that their works, whether it's audio or visual, kind of flow through them. They're just a conduit of sorts, right? And we see that across many creators of many different disciplines and genres. But in terms of the works themselves, in Hildegard's works, we see a lot of spirals, circles, ovals, what could be considered mandalas, a lot of nature imagery, a lot of cosmic imagery, elemental depictions, so like fire, earth, water, air, right? Angels, devils, saints and sinners, heaven and earth, depiction of music, the creation story, the divine feminine, right? And just to kind of go a little bit into how her recordings of these visions, you know, kind of compared to the role of visual art and symbolism in modern mystical practice. More modern mystical artists include like Hilma af Klint, who's considered to be one of the first abstract artists in the West. Fun fact, she was very interested in what we know today as spiritualism, and she was heavily influenced by Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, right? But in her work too, we see sacred geometry and elements of nature, including trees and animals. Alex Gray is another modern mystical artist, and we see more of that same kind of sacred geometry, but it's often integrated with the human form, which you also see in Hildegard's stuff, right? With some nature-based elements like trees and moon phases. So I think no matter the artist, I think visual art has a really special function for mystics across time and space, to convey to others their experience of the divine in a way that words cannot always express. And again, we can absolutely make sure that you guys get my favorite Hildegard illumination to include with your content, and yeah, definitely check them out on Patreon. Check out Matthew Fox's Illuminations of Hildegard von Bingen.
And after you've done that,
to
check
see
out
what we're talking. Yeah.
the Judas and Magnolia website and everything that they have in the store. Just add to your cart. We are going to give them a little taste of some of your music, so I'm going to have that as a little bit of a palette, not palette cleanser, a little bit of an appetizer at the
Palate
beginning of the
teaser.
episode, and a palate
Yeah.
teaser at the beginning of the episode. And we're gonna have it cap it off at the end as well.
Now that we've reached 17 facts, Luke.
Well, if I look
I
at our
think we can-
outline, we reached 6 out of 17. So we.
Oh, you're kidding.
So I think we have to have these lovely people back. Well, Judas, Magnolia, it was wonderful speaking with you both, and we look forward to speaking with you both again in the
Thank you.
future.
Thank you.
Look forward to it. Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for coming by.
All right, you guys.
Very interesting stuff. Good luck with the rest of your season.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll see you when we're looking at you.
Sounds good.